I turned 28 on a cool March evening in Raleigh, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had something to be proud of. I wasn't married. I didn't own a house yet, but I had carved out a steady career as a financial analyst at a regional bank, $9,000 a month. To some, it might just be a figure on a paycheck, but to me it was proof that the long nights studying in college libraries and the years of scrimping had been worth it. My parents decided to host a birthday dinner at their home, the same modest split-level house where my sister and I had grown up. I arrived with a peach cobbler from a bakery downtown, nervous but hopeful. I wanted this night to feel like family again, not the strained gatherings that had marked recent years. The backyard was strung with lights, neighbors chatting over plates of brisket, glasses of sweet tea clinking on the porch. My father moved between the grill and the tables, cheeks red from the heat. My mother flitted about, straightening napkins that didn't need straightening. A few of my colleagues from the bank came too, smiling warmly when they spotted me. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe this time would be different. Corinne sat near the back fence, her arms crossed, eyes darting every time someone congratulated me. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the laughter of neighbors, the smell of barbecue, the rare comfort of being celebrated. The evening unfolded with toasts and polite conversation, and for a brief spell, I allowed myself to sink into it, telling myself that birthdays were about new beginnings. But just as the candles were lit and everyone's eyes turned toward me, the weight of Corinne's stare reminded me that peace never lasted long in our family. As I watched the candles flicker on the cake, my mind slipped backward, uninvited, to the years when Corinne and I were kids under this same roof. She was the louder one, the whirlwind that demanded attention, and more often than not, she got it. New shoes when the old ones still fit, extensions on curfews when I was told no without question, second chances at things where I was held to the line. I learned early how to disappear into my books. If I brought home an A, my parents would smile distractedly, but if Corinne scraped by with a C, there was ice cream and reassurance that she was doing her best. By high school, I had stopped expecting applause. Quiet excellence became my way of surviving, a shield I could carry without asking anyone to notice. Corinne, though, seemed to float from one excuse to the next. When she was admitted to UNC Greensboro, my parents celebrated as if she'd secured a ticket to the Ivy League. But by the end of her freshman year, she called home claiming the classes were too demanding, that her professors didn't get her. She packed up her dorm, moved back to Raleigh, and that was the end of it. No lectures, no expectations. Just sympathetic nods about how college isn't for everyone. Since then, she'd drifted, a few waitressing jobs, a short stint at a boutique that ended after a disagreement with the manager, and then long stretches of unemployment. Whenever her plans unraveled, my parents softened the story. Bad bosses, unfair systems, bad luck. I used to think maybe they were right. Maybe the world was harsher to her than it was to me. But standing in that backyard now, hearing laughter around me and feeling her gaze sharp on my skin, I knew better. Corinne wasn't unlucky. She was entitled, and in a family that never made her face consequences. That entitlement had only grown sharper with age. The cake was lowered in front of me, everyone singing, but all I could feel was the storm brewing in her silence. When I think about the life I've built, I can trace it back to the nights I spent in the library at NC State, poring over finance textbooks until my eyes blurred. Scholarships covered my tuition, but only if I kept my grades high, so there wasn't much room for slipping. I worked weekends at a diner off Hillsborough Street, pouring coffee and counting tips that barely covered groceries. Those years taught me discipline, and more than that, they taught me the value of independence. During one summer, I landed an internship in Charlotte with a mid-sized investment firm. The hours were brutal late nights running numbers for analysts who barely knew my name, but I soaked it up. Every spreadsheet, every presentation, every mistake corrected pushed me closer to something that looked like a future. When graduation came, I knew I could handle pressure because I had lived it. Coming back to Raleigh felt like the right move, a chance to stay near my dad as he got older and to plant roots in the city I understood. The regional bank job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and the salary gave me breathing room I'd never had before. $9,000 a month meant bills paid on time, savings in the bank, and the quiet comfort of knowing no one could pull the rug out from under me. It wasn't wealth, it was survival, transformed into dignity. But that paycheck also drew invisible lines. Every time I mentioned work, I saw the flicker in Corinne's eyes, the way her smile tightened, the way she changed the subject. My success wasn't just my own. To her, it was a mirror of everything she hadn't achieved. At family dinners, conversations bent around her moods, and I learned to keep my victories small, unspoken, so she wouldn't feel overshadowed. Still, envy has a way of leaking through even the politest silences, and sitting at that birthday table, I could feel it pressing against me, thick and sharp, waiting for the right moment to break through. When I think about the life I've built, I can trace it back to the nights I spent in the library at NC State, poring over finance textbooks until my eyes blurred. Scholarships covered my tuition, but only if I kept my grades high, so there wasn't much room for slipping. I worked weekends at a diner off Hillsborough Street, pouring coffee and counting tips that barely covered groceries. Those years taught me discipline, and more than that, they taught me the value of independence. During one summer, I landed an internship in Charlotte with a mid-sized investment firm. The hours were brutal late nights running numbers for analysts who barely knew my name, but I soaked it up. Every spreadsheet, every presentation, every mistake corrected pushed me closer to something that looked like a future. When graduation came, I knew I could handle pressure because I had lived it. Coming back to Raleigh felt like the right move, a chance to stay near my dad as he got older and to plant roots in the city I understood. The regional bank job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and the salary gave me breathing room I'd never had before. $9,000 a month meant bills paid on time, savings in the bank, and the quiet comfort of knowing no one could pull the rug out from under me. It wasn't wealth, it was survival, transformed into dignity. But that paycheck also drew invisible lines. Every time I mentioned work, I saw the flicker in Corinne's eyes, the way her smile tightened, the way she changed the subject. My success wasn't just my own. To her, it was a mirror of everything she hadn't achieved. At family dinners, conversations bent around her moods, and I learned to keep my victories small, unspoken, so she wouldn't feel overshadowed. Still, envy has a way of leaking through even the politest silences, and sitting at that birthday table, I could feel it pressing against me, thick and sharp, waiting for the right moment to break through. The singing had just faded, and the first wisps of smoke curled from the candles when Corinne scraped her chair back with a sound that silenced the yard. All eyes turned toward her. She didn't raise a glass or smile, didn't offer a toast. Her voice came out sharp, slicing through the air with a conviction that made my stomach drop. "From today on," she said, her gaze locked on me, "you'll hand over your entire $9,000 salary and every bonus. If you refuse, get out right now." The words hung there, so outrageous I thought at first I'd misheard her. But then the gasps began, rippling around the table. A neighbor dropped his fork, the clatter loud in the stunned quiet. My colleagues looked at one another in disbelief, their faces registering secondhand humiliation. I sat frozen, the heat from the candles pressing against my cheeks. My first instinct was to laugh, to dismiss it as some sick joke, but Corinne's eyes told me otherwise. They glittered with a hard edge, daring me to defy her. I turned to my parents, desperate for something an intervention, a defense, anything that would puncture the absurdity of the moment. My father's eyes were fixed on the brisket knife he still held, his knuckles white around the handle. My mother lowered her gaze to her lap, fingers twisting in the hem of her napkin. Neither spoke, Neither moved. It was as though their silence was rehearsed. An old script they knew by heart let Corinne speak. Let her rage. Let the rest of us endure it. But this time, it wasn't a tantrum about high school grades or a lost job. This was my life, my work, my independence laid bare and claimed by someone who had never lifted a hand to earn it. The betrayal hit me in two waves. First, the audacity of Corinne's demand, the way she said it as if my paycheck already belonged to her, and second, the crushing weight of my parents' silence, their refusal to shield me from her greed. They didn't need to say the words aloud. Their bowed heads told me everything. My chest tightened, and I felt the sting of humiliation press against the back of my eyes. Around me, whispers grew louder, the guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. But no one spoke above a murmur. All the warmth from the evening had drained, replaced by a suffocating heaviness. I knew in that moment something had fractured beyond repair. And as I pushed back my chair, the sound of its legs scraping against the porch boards, I realized the only choice left to me was to stand and face the silence head on. The air felt heavier with every second that passed. Whispers rippled across the yard, the kind that scrape against your skin even if you can't make out the words. I could feel the eyes on me, neighbors, colleagues, even family friends all watching to see how I'd respond, how I'd survive being stripped bare in front of them. Corinne leaned back in her chair, her lips curved into a smirk that told me she had been waiting for this moment. She fed on the silence, on the spectacle she'd created, her shoulders relaxing as if she'd proven something. For her, this was victory. I turned again to my father, hoping for a sign that he would finally speak, that the man who had once told me to be proud of what I'd built would defend me. But he only swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his thumb running over the rim as though studying it would spare him from facing me. My mother kept her eyes fixed on the tablecloth, fingers clenched tight in her lap. It was as if they believed that if they didn't move, if they didn't breathe, they could erase what Corinne had said. The betrayal burned worse than Corinne's demand. Her cruelty was expected. Their silence was not. The shame twisted inside me until it was too sharp to bear. I straightened my shoulders and pushed my chair back. The scrape of wood against the porch cut through the murmurs, drawing every eye to me. I stood without a word, my chest aching but my face steady. I would not give them the satisfaction of watching me crumble. Corinne's smirk faltered, just slightly, as I lifted my chin and stepped away from the table. I didn't wait for anyone to call after me, because no one would. I walked through the yard, past the string lights and the guests who parted silently to let me through, past the house I had once called home. The night air wrapped around me, cool and sharp, as I crossed the street to where my car waited. I opened the door, slid inside, and with one last glance at the glowing backyard behind me, I turned the key and drove away into the dark. The road stretched out before me, Raleigh's familiar streets blurred by the mix of tears and headlights. I passed the grocery store where I'd worked weekends in high school, the library where I had spent countless hours with a backpack full of ambition, and the coffee shop where I'd poured lattes while saving for textbooks. Every corner carried a memory, each one reminding me of how far I had come, how much of my life I had built on my own. The ache in my chest throbbed with every mile. Anger burned hot at Corinne, at my parents, at myself for still wanting their approval. But beneath the rage was something else, something I hadn't expected. Relief. I rolled down the window, letting the cool March air rush against my face. It felt cleansing, as though the night itself was stripping away the weight of all those years I'd carried quietly, hoping for recognition that never came. Without thinking, I turned into Pullen Park, the same park where my father used to bring me when I was small, when he was still the anchor I believed could steady anything. I parked and walked to the pond, the surface catching the faint glow of the street lamps. Sitting on the bench, I let myself breathe, slow and steady, until the noise of the night faded. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like space to exist without anyone demanding, belittling, or erasing me. I whispered it aloud, barely more than a breath. No one will dictate my worth again. The words lingered in the air, stronger than I felt, but true all the same. I stayed there until the cold seeped through my dress and my hands numbed, then stood and made my way back to the car, ready to face whatever came next. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the exhaustion hit me like a weight. I slipped off my shoes, set my phone on the counter, and collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. The night had carved something raw inside me, but it had also left behind a strange steadiness, like the ground had shifted and finally settled. It was close to midnight when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but the name flashing across the screen stopped me cold. Corinne. I answered, bracing myself. Her voice wasn't sharp this time. It was shaky, uneven. Ilara, you need to help me. Please. I didn't say anything, letting her fill the silence. People recorded it, she blurted. At the party what I said. It's everywhere now. Neighbors are talking. Your coworkers were there. And I know they'll tell everyone at your bank. Mom and Dad are humiliated. They said I've ruined our name. You have to fix this. Tell people it was a joke. I sat there, listening to the panic in her voice, the cracks where triumph had lived only hours ago. In her world, my humiliation had always been hers to command, but the spotlight had turned on her this time. I can't undo what you chose to say, I told her, my voice steady. She sniffled, her breath catching. If you don't, everyone will hate me. You'll let them hate me. I thought of the smirk on her face, the silence of my parents, the way I had walked out alone. My answer didn't come quickly, but when it did, it felt final. This isn't mine to fix, I said, and hung up, the quiet ringing louder than her voice ever had. The next morning, I drove back to my parents' house, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. The yard still bore the remnants of last night folding chairs stacked on the porch, paper plates in the trash bin, a faint smell of charcoal lingering in the air. Inside, the house was quiet, the kind of silence that carried guilt. My father sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling between his hands. My mother stood by the sink, rinsing dishes that were already clean. Neither looked at me until I pulled out a chair. I should have said something, my father finally murmured, his eyes fixed on the mug. We both should have. We didn't because, well, you know how Corinne gets. We've always tried to keep the peace. I let the words hang there, heavy and unsatisfying. Your silence hurt worse than anything she said. She's been this way for years, but you let it grow. Last night wasn't just her doing, it was yours too. My mother turned, her lips trembling. We thought if we gave her what she wanted, she'd calm down. We didn't realize what it would cost you. I kept my voice steady. It cost me more than you think. But I won't let her dictate my life. I won't hand over my salary, and I won't keep shrinking so she feels bigger. If you want to rebuild anything with me, it has to start with honesty, not silence. They both nodded, small and uncertain, like people hearing a language they hadn't spoken in years. I stood, ready to leave, knowing the rest was up to them. And for the first time, I felt the weight of choice shift onto their shoulders instead of mine. In the weeks that followed, the chaos quieted, though its echoes lingered. I filled my days with purpose, registering for CFA prep classes that pushed me late into the night, the kind of studying that reminded me of my college years but now carried a sharper edge of determination. On weekends, I packed small bags and drove sometimes to Wilmington, sometimes to Asheville, letting the change of scenery remind me how wide the world was beyond the four walls of my family's home. I leaned more into friendships I had once neglected, saying yes to dinners and hikes, surrounding myself with people who saw me for who I was, not for what they could take. Each laugh shared, each conversation that stretched late into the night, stitched something back together inside me. My parents tried in their own ways to reach out. A card in the mail from my mother with a note about how proud she was. My father stopping by with a bag of groceries he insisted he had accidentally overbought. I accepted the gestures but kept them at arm's length, knowing that trust wasn't repaired by tokens but by actions. Over time. Corinne, on the other hand, faded into the margins. I heard through neighbors that invitations stopped coming her way, that the story of that night followed her into every room she entered. The smirk she once wore had been replaced by silence, and for once, she had no one else to blame. Looking back, I realized that birthday hadn't marked the loss of family or the collapse of belonging. It had marked something else entirely the moment I chose myself. It wasn't an ending. It was a rebirth, one I had claimed with nothing but my own 2 hands.